Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you. Yeah, I'm Jon Zeitlin, and yeah, I had about 25 or 30 years working in education, educational services. I ran the biggest SAT prep program in the world for a while at Kaplan, and I went to Yale as an undergrad and Stanford for grad school. And in the last 5 years, I've been continuing in education, but also working in behavioral health and become something of an expert on executive function and ADHD.
Thank you, John and Heather. Welcome to join. And this is our agenda for today's webinar. I will start with a 3-minute introduction to IGP, who we are, what we do. Then we will cover how application and process development in middle school and how to plan for early high school years. Then John will discuss more about our executive functioning skills.
You might be wondering why we're talking about executive functioning skills in a college admissions presentation. And as a parent, when your kids are young, you can kind of say like, study hard, pass the test, and practice your violin. And you've probably noticed already by the time the kids start hitting middle school, you're having less and less impact on that. And so and it's really going to come more and more from your kids if they're going to be able to, succeed in all these different things. And as parents, though, what I want to do with you for this presentation is to take you a little bit under the hood of your kids' brains and understand a little bit better how their brains might be working. And I think it's very good. It's a very good way of thinking about how to parent as you hit these sort of middle and high school years, and you kind of have your vision firmly focused on college. So let me go through some of this stuff. We're going to jump ahead. There we go. So I think I already did my background, but I do have a strong background both in education. I was a senior executive at Kaplan for many years, and also in executive function. And I've been using that combination in backgrounds in a lot of the work I've been doing. I'm the CEO of these two companies, Testing Mom, which is a test prep and accelerated tutoring company for gifted students. We do SAT and ACT prep and a lot of prep for younger kids' exams as well. And then we work with gifted students primarily, and we do this sort of accelerated one-on-one tutoring with gifted students. Habit Coach is an executive function coaching and academic skills program. So we work with kids of all ages to help them with some of the things I'm going to talk about, which is improving their executive function skills. And a lot of that is, again, with the goal of, since we work primarily with gifted kids, of succeeding academically and in their extracurricular. So briefly, so I live in Silicon Valley. I live in Palo Alto, where Stanford is. I have 3 teenagers. I have a 19-year-old who's a freshman at Oberlin College, and then I have boy-girl twins who are sophomores at Gunn High School, which is a super pressure cooker high school. And then I also do, in addition to my day job, so to speak, I also on the side do some coaching with teenagers who are typically from, these areas that are, sort of high performing. I myself grew up in Newton, Mass, which is also somewhat similar, not quite as intense as Palo Alto, but nonetheless pretty high performing suburb. So what are executive functioning skills and why are they so important? So simply put, they're the thinking skills that help us get things done. I'll say that again, they're the thinking skills that help us get things done. So sometimes I think of like a little executive, sitting in my brain and helping me with things like planning and organization. I'll go through the whole list in a second. And to get into a good college and be successful in life, there's a lot of research that shows that executive function and social skills are equally important, in some cases more important than academic skills. And I think as parents, we tend to focus on the academic skills. They're obviously important. GPA is #1 factor for college admissions, but these other skills can be underlooked, but are equally important, not just for college admissions, but for life. So here are the executive function skills. So I group them. I have working memory issues myself. This helps me keep track and remember them. So and feel free to take a screenshot of this screen. It's a pretty valuable screen. Well, I think of the ADHD classic. So you don't have to have ADHD to have issues with executive function, but people who have ADHD are going to be struggling with things like organization, prioritization, and planning, working memory. They lose things a lot, time management. They have a hard time making on time to appointments. That's like when you think of the stereotype of someone with ADHD, that's probably what you think of. But there's a lot of other executive function skills. So procrastination is really an epidemic, I think, amongst teenagers. A lot of that has to do with the internet. And so we break that down, but getting started and focus and follow through. And then there's the higher level skills, which people don't associate with executive function, but they are. So things like flexible thinking, self-awareness or metacognition, which means thinking about thinking, response inhibition, or another way of saying that is anti-impulsivity, that you're able to inhibit your responses, emotional control. Again, if you can't control your emotions, it's very hard to get things done. You can see that in academics, you can see that in sports, you can see that in the arts. And then there's two more that I usually bring in here, even though they're not exactly specifically executive function, but processing speed. Both people tend to think of too slow processing speed, but too fast is also an issue. And then the final one is attention to detail. Okay, I'm going to give you three examples of how important executive function is on the path to college, since we're talking about college admissions tonight. Okay, so in the back in the day, it was really all about grades and SAT scores, but a lot has changed. And there's huge grade inflation now. And so, it seems like everybody has a 4.0 or a 4.5 or a 4.8, and it's harder and harder to excel, with just grades alone. And then of course, the SAT and the ACT are still very important, but because so many schools have gone test optional, it's not quite where it was, back in the day when I ran the Kaplan SAT program. And so increasingly, some of the things like extracurricular activities, the essay you write, the way you express yourself as an individual has become more and more important in college admissions. And colleges are looking to build a community. They're not really looking for the all-around kid anymore. They're looking for the person who really excels, because they want their graduates to be future leaders. They want them to be amazing. It might be an incredible academic leader or a business leader or in the arts, or it doesn't really matter. But these top colleges, that's the reason why they're there. The reason why they're there is to train people. I mean, I know I went to a bunch of them, and my classmates are leaders, many of them. So anyhow, metacognition becomes really, really important. And I will use an example. So a lot of times sometimes they take on their parents' hobbies. So my daughter played the cello for years, and I'm a cellist, and that was a big thing for me getting into college. But it just didn't really, she worked really, really hard, but for some reason or other, it was just very hard for her. And she also does, she's also a very strong water polo player. She's on the path to getting recruited for college in water polo. So this year, she's always very interested in politically. She's taking journalism, and she's getting very involved with local political issues. And she's just saying goodbye to cello, which was hard. She's still playing in the school orchestra, but she's no longer taking lessons and practicing all the time. And this journalism, political activism thing, it's so easy to see it's a better fit for her. But this was not, this was my wife and I had a sense of this, but this was my daughter really looking inside of herself and saying, this is really where I can excel. This is where my talents are. And so, and she's going after those two things now. She's going after water polo. She's going after journalism. My son is sort of similar. He played soccer for years, which was my other big hobby, and he was good, but not great. And as his interests developed, he realized that he had two completely different things that he was interested in. So he's really interested in jazz. He's an extremely good jazz trombone player, and he's interested in languages. And right now he's taking an exchange semester in Taiwan, to kind of advance his language. He's learning Chinese. And he's got a gig, playing with a bunch of adults, every Tuesday night in a cafe in Taiwan. So he's another guy who, and by the way, he has ADHD, but he's got incredible self-knowledge, and he's like, I know that this is how I'm going to stand out. This is what I want to do. And so that self-awareness or ability to think about yourself is a super important quality. I think it's something that admission officers can see. They're looking for kids who know themselves, who can describe who they are. So that's one example. Let's go on. Okay, I'm going to go through an SAT question. I taught SAT for years, so I have a soft spot for this. Okay, so I took this from the College Board website. It's a very classic SAT reading comp question. I'm just going to let you guys read that for 30 seconds. So most kids who read this, it's pretty thick, right? It's not like, it's not like fiction reading. It's pretty thick. They could easily get to the end and say, I didn't really understand that. I might have to read it a second time or a third time. But of course, the SAT and the ACT are time tests. So, so I'm going to give you, this is how this executive function thing works is you look for your executive function strengths and you learn to play to them. You look for your executive function weaknesses and you find workarounds for them. So it's hard if, for example, if you have working memory issues, you probably always will your whole life, but you can find these workarounds so that they don't get in the way of your life. And so a workaround for something like this, reading comp, of course, is to mark it up. And so, instead of just kind of reading through this and reading through it a second time, read through it and think about it and mark it up. Okay, so now this makes it really easy. They're talking about an animal with a sail-like structure and how it improves their success in getting after prey, capable of making quick, evasive movements. Wow, boy, that's much easier. I don't have to remember nearly as much that I was able to do that. Okay, so the next skill would be attention to detail. What's the question actually asking? That's a hard thing for kids. Which finding from the model test, if true, would most strongly support Ginsa and colleagues' hypothesis? And the important thing there is most strongly. That's something it's pretty classic for a reading comprehension question. Okay, so then great. Now we have a pretty good idea that we're looking for an animal that is that the sail helps them evade quick evasive movements, and then you have to really have really strong focus to go through these four answer choices and finally get down to D. A model with a sail took significantly less time to complete a sharp turn while submerged. Anyhow, that's answer D. So the thing is, if you're taking SAT prep, your SAT tutor is probably not going to be talking about executive function. They're most likely to be talking about strategies and how to do this. But as a parent, you should understand that what's really going on here is your child using their various executive functions to answer a hard question like this correctly. Okay, now one more example, executive function skills needed for college applications. You will see when your child is a senior, how incredibly challenging this can be. Kids apply these days from 20 to 40 schools typically. You have your Common App essay, and then you have all of the individual essays that all the colleges apply. There's tons of deadlines. This is the reason why you should hire somebody like Ingenious Prep. They'll project manage your kid and help make sure that you keep them on. So the first thing is figuring out where to apply. And that is an issue of prioritization and planning, right? Like you'll learn that every college admissions officer is you need to find reach schools, target schools, safety schools, but figuring that out and being realistic about it really takes some prioritization and planning. Keeping track of the deadlines. That's really an issue of organization. Again, a college counselor will help you with that, but your child still has to they're not sitting there in your house saying like your application is due tomorrow, right? So your child does have to have a lot of executive function to keep track of this very difficult process. Next one is expressing oneself in the essays. So in order to be able to really write about yourself and express yourself, that really takes self-awareness and metacognition. And finally, just getting 40 to 80 essays written, and that really takes focus and follow through. It's a bit of a grueling process. And so I have worked sometimes with kids where literally I'd have to sit with them, to go through every single essay because they just didn't have, they just had struggled, big procrastination issues. So as you can see, again, people are not going to usually use this language of executive function when they're talking about the college applications process, but that's actually what's going on in your child's brain. Okay, so just to finish up, I think you know about Ingenious to do college prep. Again, testing mom. We do we do a lot of tutoring with gifted kids, and we also get kids ready for tests, especially gifted tests. And at Habit Coach, we work on all these skills to help kids excel. We have a coaching program. We have coaches who work with kids. We have parent coaching, and then we also have a program that's it's a self-study program to help parents with language and how to motivate their kids in a healthy way. And we put the phone number on the screen. Thank you so much.